Welcome to episode 2 of the Better Band Bureau podcast.
You're listening to the Better Band Bureau podcast, the #1 online resource for DIY bands to learn about the music business and touring. If you want to turn your band into a lean, mean touring machine, you're in the right place. Now, let's get this show on the road.
Welcome to episode 2 of the Better Band Bureau podcast. If you just finished listening to episode 1 and then came right over to episode 2, that is awesome. Thank you so much. Just a quick ask, please go to Apple Podcasts or iTunes and leave us a rating or review. It takes 30 seconds and helps us out so much. Now, let's get into this episode. In episode 1, you didn't learn anything about us or why we should be telling you how to run your band. So to prove that we're not just two random guys on the internet, we are going to share a little bit of our backstories. And first off, we're going to have my co-host, Aaron Gingras, from the band Suburban Samurai. How's it going today?
Good. What's going on?
I'm glad to hear that. And not much, really. Just, prepping for my upcoming vacation, which will be long gone by the time this episode comes out. But aside from that, pretty much same old.
Nice.
Before the episode, we were talking a little bit about your plans for the band, so it sounds like you've got some big things in store. But before we get to your current gig in Suburban Samurai, why don't we go way back in time?
Yes.
That'll have to have some echo on it when I do the edit. And find out how you got started in the music industry and what kind of piqued your interest in music in the first place.
Boy, I think that's one of those, there's not just one answer to it, so I kind of get to pick and choose my own adventure. No, I think to kind of sum it all up, well, if our listeners don't already know, we're both living in Vermont, in the United States, and the person who is now the guitar player in the band that I'm in, Subsam, we actually, I don't want to say grew up together, but we kind of grew up together in the same town, same elementary school, same middle and high school. And into adulthood. And it was actually, I'd kind of have to give him credit. I think he was probably one of the first, like an interest in music, like that spark kind of came to me from like a couple of different angles. But he was definitely one of them where, you're 13, 14, 15. That's usually when I'd say probably most of the people listening, we go like, yeah, that's when I got into it. My guitar player, Cody, got into playing guitar. And it was right around that same time, I think we were 14, 15 years old, where my aunt had a drum set, which she kept at my dad's work. And his work was something where when everybody left at the end of the night, he could kind of be as loud as he wanted. It's there was a model home. He built homes and he kept that in, up in the second floor or wherever it was. And so, he was kind of the, he could do whatever he wanted. And so he was kind enough to, and my aunt, whose drum set it was kind enough to let me kind of play around with it for a little bit. And so it was seeing a drum set in person and kind of being able to fool around with it for a little bit while at the same time, my best friend picking up the guitar. It was kind of okay, well, I guess that's what's happening. And so I think that's kind of how I got into drums. And then I worked, I remember all summer, I think my 14th year going into turning 15 to save up money for my first drum set. And, as they say, the rest is history. And I think from that point, the rabbit hole has only gotten deeper, from there. So it's really just, I found a drum set at the right time. Right time being my good friend picked up an instrument. And so I kind of got into it that way.
So you kind of just fell into it. And I have to say, when you're talking about having the drum set in the model home on the second floor, I was just imagining a Bluth model home with a drum set in the attic and George Michael like bashing on the drums.
And see, when they say that was based on a true story, now you know where that came from.
Of course, Michael Cera was also in Scott Pilgrim, where he played bass.
Yes.
So that doesn't quite tie into Sub Sam, but good TV show and a good movie and a good band. So it all fits together. Moving on, you had some very high-profile professional experience in the music industry before coming back to focus on your own music with Sub Sam. And you also ended up going to school.
I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So after, having fallen into the role of like DIY drummer and, just having fun with it while trying to learn, through middle school and high school, basically that's, any other hobby that I had or any other, anything else that I had happened to have been interested in at that point went away when I started playing an instrument. It just total like black hole, but in like the best possible way. I just like every part of me was sucked into this thing and trying to get better at it, because it's truly something that I think you whatever way you're coming from, you kind of get out of it what you put in. And so that was kind of exciting. So it kind of took over my world, and then I realized that you could go to school for that. And so I went to school. They call it something different now, but when I went, it was Lyndon State College, which was still just in Vermont. They had a baby music business and industry program there. There were a few people who came together who I'm ashamed to say I don't know what they did before, but I would imagine a few of them had been teaching things other than music. I know, the head of the first head of the department was very involved in music and came from another school, but they were just trying to put something together, and it really just. I'm not kidding you when I say, the first tour that I took of like the space, and I met the faculty, when I was trying to learn a little bit about the space before I chose to go there, there was a hole in the wall. It was a closet. Like, the studio they had was a live room, and it was one room with like a 6-foot folding table and, an analog or I think an analog console, and like you had the drummer playing there. The person who was recording you sat at the 6-foot table. Like it was rough. But what really drew me into that, they had some people on their team who were really working hard to build that up and turn that into something more. And by the time that I graduated, they had taken over the school. And by that, I don't mean the whole school was a recording school. I may not get this entirely right, but it was one of the cornerstones, by the time I graduated of, the school, just based on, new students each year. Like they were pulling a lot of new students. They were finally getting the funding that they needed to do a lot of the stuff. There were, new people who were introduced as like faculty within the program who, all came from, other backgrounds that were, I think, really valuable to the education that the students received, and just kind of like the general like appeal. Like people started to catch on and go, "Oh, this is something that has potential, and there's a lot of interest in this." So by the time I left, they remodeled the wing of the school. So they had a very nice studio space. And from what I hear, what little I keep up with the program, they're continuing to invest in new equipment, new spaces. And it's turned into something which is really nice and absolutely no longer a hole in the wall. And so that's where I went. I didn't go for recording or engineering. I started as a production major is not the right word. I was focused in production. I got just about as good. It's to the point where I realized that wasn't my strength. And so I continued with that program, but I switched over to business, considering up until that point, all the way from when I, picked up my first set of drumsticks through college, like, well, I've kind of always been that guy. It's what I do anyways. Why don't I learn a little bit more about this and really take a deep dive into like what it is I've already been doing. How do I make it better? What do other people do with this? How far can you go? And so that's kind of what I did in college. And yeah, from there, I'm thinking the summer before my last year at college, I did a full Warped Tour. I was connected by one of the faculty members with a band out of Boston, and I ran their merch for the summer. At that point, I had only done, cumulatively, not cumulatively. I had done like a week, like here and there, like with my own project, nothing substantial, but I was lucky enough for the teacher to like see that, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was trying and I wanted to learn more. And he gave me an opportunity, which really ended up paying off for me because I was introduced to the idea of what it really means to be thrown in head first, doing Warped merch. I went into that really not knowing if I was, I'm lucky I did. And if there's anybody listening who's also on that tour, obviously, it worked out. But, really like when you are thrown in head first to something you haven't done before, there's always that like, hey, how's it going to go? But for somebody like a little younger, like I was, it was very challenging. It was boot camp. And I was lucky to spill out on the other end, like totally eating it up and liking it. But if, maybe if somebody else was in the same position, that would have been their cue to like quit and move away. But that just served to like suck me into that world more. As I sort of drew closer and closer to my graduation from the school, I sort of found myself at a point where I had another opportunity I could take this time working as a production assistant, as an intern for a artist who's been very successful, also out of the Massachusetts area. And so where Warped Tour was summer 2011, I went on this other run 2012, all the while, being in school, the spring before, and working for these people while taking classes, and it was like super hectic. But so I worked my ass off for those folks while in school. I went on to graduate. I went on tour with them, and again, a production assistant, like a production capacity. And then there I stayed for the next 6 or 7 years, somewhere between 6 and 7. And I kind of just focused on, it's going to sound like a bad thing when I say it, but kind of giving my 20s away. I gave that job my all. And I tried to take from it everything that I could. And as a result, again, I was very lucky to have some very nice people notice that. It seems like that's what happened. And so I climbed the ladder from production assistant to production coordinator. And then probably due to a couple of different things kind of all convening and happening at the same time, my last full outing with those folks, I was production office manager. So I kind of just spent a lot of time climbing the ladder and soaking up as much as I could. And then after 6 or 7 years of that, and I'm feeling really old right now, all the while I had, still been continuing to play music, and when I was home doing as much as I could for my own projects. Let's probably 2015, I'll say, I started to realize that I, up until that point, had been pouring all of this effort into my job, as I should have, so I was, but I wasn't really doing the same for like my own thing. I was thinking, here I am, doing this for somebody else, and again, as I should have been, but kind of seems like it could also be doing that for myself, or to a point. And so I, together with the guitar player from much earlier in the story, my guitar player, Cody, we both kind of came out of having been in another band, and then the same with our bass player. And so the three of us kind of formed this new thing from an old band, and kind of spent a year and a half, like really trying to build the infrastructure, at first understanding what that is or what it should be, and then building that. And then 2016, the beginning of 2016 was where we really tried to throw everything at the wall. And where the year before we had kind of tried to, assemble the whole thing, still not knowing what we were really doing. We started touring in 2016. I think we did, where we did like 11 shows. The first year we were together, like writing and trying to figure stuff out and not sucking so hard at our instruments anymore, which, it may or may not still be a thing depending on who you talk to. We did 11 shows that year. We did I think 51 or 52 that second year, 2016, and I think that took us as far as Virginia, and then as far west probably as Pittsburgh, Buffalo, kind of in there. So an era of expansion. And again, all while working production for this other artist. So very hectic, hopping back and forth from one world to another. 2017, the same thing. 2018 was the year that I chose, for a couple of different reasons, all both positive reasons, to leave my post as production for this other artist. And just continue to kind of focus on myself and my own music and the band's music. And so that kind of more or less brings us to today. We're in 2019, and the focus has been to continue to explore, how the heck we can continue to build this thing up from the ground, whether that be new markets, new modes of tour transportation when old ones kick the bucket, or new music, kind of further and faster into all of the different facets of it. There's my monologue, but it's it's an exciting time. Still learning, never stop learning, but it's always fun to be able to have conversations like this and kind of look back and reflect on progress made. And
I think one really interesting thing is that even though you have all this great experience with SubSam, you're still very much a DIY band, in part because you can do it all yourself. And I would say you self-manage SubSam better than 95 or even 99% of the other DIY bands out there because of your experience. But you've been doing SubSam for about 4 years now, and you're still growing it. So Absolutely. I want to highlight that a lot of bands think they're going to start a band and get signed overnight, and that's just not realistic. That's like a 1 in 10,000 chance that that's going to happen.
To kind of put it in plain text, the artist that I was lucky enough to spend so much time with, in a production capacity, I've, either done tour work or toured through, probably 20, 25 countries on 4 continents. And I come home and, although I've been able to take away a lot from that work and sort of apply it to my own, what I do with my own band, it's really done a number on, it's really done a lot to sort of shape how I interpret a lot of things and how I try to, not always, but how I try to interact with people and situations. But at the end of the day, having done all that, I'm still with SubSam. We are, not too good to do a lot of things still, and it's so to kind of to your point of, a band putting in a lot of hard work, and it is very hard to, tour for a year and then having that band think that, whatever it is that they think success means is like right around the corner, making it's right around the corner just isn't like realistic. And that's, this is not me trying to, brag in any way. It just so happens that, this is what I've done and this is what I know. It happens to be the truth, in this situation. And I think a lot of bands, I cannot stand when people use words like famous or success, because they're both subjective and mean very different things to different people. So yeah, I think it's all incremental progress, no matter who you are or where you're from.
Yeah, definitely. And there are other artists, and this is kind of the old model of the music industry, but look at Green Day. They were a band for 6-7 years before Dookie came out.
Yeah.
So that was quite some time before they got signed, and that was their first big hit. They'd put some stuff out before that, but they were pretty much like a local DIY band.
And like 6 or 7 years, that's longer than Subsam's. Like that's older than we are at this point. And a lot of people who, like, if I go and find some 14-year-old mall rat, like, who's has wearing a Green Day shirt, they may not know what Dookie is.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, how's that for feeling old?
Yeah, 24 years.
But really, though, it's like, it's patience and perseverance and all of those things.
Yeah, it turned 25 this year. It was 94, not 95, wasn't it?
That sounds about right.
Oh. Now I feel old too. Either way, I am older than that album, as are you. Jeez, that's... Anyway, just so
sorry.
The point being, even most of the top rock bands out there had a period of 5-10 years before they grew and had commercial success. As you said, there are so many different ways to define fame and success, but to say commercial success in the terms of, hitting the top 200 on Billboard or something like that, there are bands that, have gone 10 years, 15 years, and then finally get that one hit. So I think it's important to have the attitude that Aaron has about perseverance. And even if you have a great job with a high-profile artist, if your dream is music, playing your own music, you might have to say, let me take a step back so I can focus on this rather than doing a job that you enjoy with another artist, And it goes to show that even though Subsam right now isn't, touring the whole country and you're just still doing regional or, out to like Ohio and down to Virginia, as you were saying, there is something going on there, because you did 51 shows in 2017 or 2016, you said. That's huge. A lot of DIY bands couldn't pull that off. That's basically a show a week, and I'm sure you didn't do them one at a time like you did tours.
Yeah.
But that's still really impressive that you had the mental bandwidth to pull that off while you were also touring essentially full-time, working for another artist. That's
I don't know if mental bandwidth or that sounds like such a nice thing. I was probably pulling my hair out most of that time. But it's, I would say Subsam's extraordinarily successful, though not quite yet commercially successful. I think the latter would be quite nice, but I think another thing to consider for anybody listening is, you're going to have to give up a lot. Chances are you're going to have to give up a lot, whether it's the decision making, if you jump in bed with, Joe Schmo in Hollywood, or, if you choose to keep a lot of that closer to your chest, like, you're going to give up a lot of time and other personal opportunities. So that's always a balance, but it's, whatever. Yeah, I think it's like a $20 means more to me than the other guy thing. Small successes sometimes feel much bigger than they are. if it's something you've worked really hard at.
I would agree with that. I mean, some people would look at it and say, I did this big tour, now I'm touring and playing, house shows. Like, this is lame. But you look at it the other way, you say, you're playing your music to new people.
And I've thought of it both ways too. It's, if you're having a bad day, it's easier to for certain kinds of thoughts to kind of, blob up to the surface. Yeah. I've woken up in a pilot parking lot in my bunk in a van, and, I've thought of it both ways. Wow, where was I a year ago? Now I'm waking up and sweating my ass off in a pilot parking lot, smelling gas. But then you keep talking to yourself and you think, well, that's kind of because nobody, put us here but us. And, the only responsibilities should be another episode. But aside from all the responsibility, all the things we need to knock out today, really the today's goal is to go play music and have, what will hopefully turn out to be a very good time. So it's all on how you look at things, and, there's no one size fits all, and both ways of thinking about that probably are true. It's just, how you choose to kind of live your life.
Exactly. Well, I think that's a super positive outlook, and here's to Sub Sam and what you can bring to this podcast to help people bring their band the success that Sub Sam is having, and knock on wood, will continue to have.
Rockin'. But I think if it's about that time, kind of 180 this and sort of talk about yourself, James. So we've got this podcast. This is obviously a brainchild of yours. What else have you done? What else are you doing? And then maybe we can kind of start in the middle and then record scratch 3 weeks earlier, or what I'm going to assume is closer to 10 or 15 or 20 years earlier. But we can talk about how you kind of wound up where you are. But yeah, what keeps you busy day to day, and maybe we can walk backwards from there.
Yeah. So basically right now I have 3 distinct things that I'm doing on pretty much a daily basis. One of them obviously being the Better Band Bureau, which, if you're listening to this, you know that the Better Band Bureau is a resource for DIY bands to learn how to successfully manage their DIY band rather than running it into the ground. In addition to that, I run Pinnacle Pro Sound, which is a mixing studio, and I work with artists from all over the country or even the world, and basically take the tracks that they have recorded either by themselves or in a studio and mix them to be the best possible version of what it can be, and help the band have the mix that they hear in their head, essentially. And so mostly I work with rock bands, punk, pop punk, that kind of stuff. Aaron and I are in the same scene here in Vermont, the DIY, I don't want to say post-punk, but indie punk scene probably would be a pretty good.
That's probably what's generating the most buzz these days.
Yeah, just a way to encompass it, And so those are typically the artists I work with. And then I also do podcast editing for another podcast called the Six Figure Home Studio Podcast, which is run by Brian Hood, formerly of the band My Children, My Bride. And that's a podcast all about running a successful recording studio. And so in part, participating in the editing process of that was what made me realize for Better Band Bureau, you know what? I hate being on camera. And if you've watched my videos, I don't know if you like those videos or not, random listener out there, but I feel so ungenuine reading off of a script. That's why I realized, you know what? I have to just do this as a podcast, and I have to have a co-host so I'm not just talking to myself. I want to have a conversation and have somebody that can challenge me a little bit. If I say something that, maybe there's a differing opinion on that or something, where I know, Aaron, you will totally do that because you have all this great experience as well. So you might say, you know what, I wouldn't do it that way. I'd do it this way. And just having a two-way flow of information rather than just me talking at the camera. So that's how the Better Band Bureau podcast came about. And to go way back when, it's not quite 15 or 20 years. Although I was always interested in music, I actually did, when I was about probably 5 or 6, did get a drum kit from some neighbors down the street. They had a garage sale, and my dad and my mom came home and surprised me with a drum kit. Super basic kit,
That's
kick,
so cool,
tom, and snare. And yeah, for parents in the suburbs to be like, hey, here's your drum kit, like
generous.
yeah, it was really cool. And come to think of it, I think they started with one of those like little practice pads first, like try this. And then I found out they had gotten it all at the same time. I was like, you got a drum kit 2 weeks ago, you didn't tell me.
Oh.
But it was really fun, and I enjoyed playing drums, and I'd always enjoyed music. What I listen to now is totally different from what I listened to back then. It was like Randy Newman, The Neils, which is a band from Massachusetts who now does like kids music, but back then it was like folk rock. And
oh my God.
Totally
transformation.
They totally 180'd it. That was a really good band. And obviously Randy Newman, now he's the guy that everyone knows for the Toy Story song. But back then he was doing stuff with like Mark Knopfler and other big name artists like that. So that was really cool. That was just the music I enjoyed. And I did drums for a while, tried to take lessons, and the teacher wanted to teach me nothing but jazz. So that didn't last very long because I did not like jazz. Still don't, no offense if anyone out there is a jazz player. It's just not my thing. And I can respect jazz, but I do not want to play jazz. That's where I draw the line. And so fast forward, about 10 years, and I was really getting into music as many teenagers do, and just listening to bands like AFI and Green Day, who we mentioned earlier. And at that point, we had around the corner here a community radio station where anyone can go and host a radio show, WGDR at Goddard College. Oh, and I was homeschooled, so that's part of the story. I actually, as part of my homeschooling, got to go learn how to host a radio show. And then the person training me was so impressed that he asked me to come on as his intern and train other people. Long story short, he got fired, so I basically started running the department.
Inherited.
Yeah. And, I was still technically an intern, but I had more responsibility than earlier while they were finding somebody else to do the job. And started learning live sound over there and realized, this would be really cool. Ended up going to school for audio. And I have to be honest, I think the audio portion of what I learned wasn't the biggest takeaway I got, because most of the time those audio classes, I learned more on YouTube and just by trying stuff in Pro Tools than I did in those classes. But the entertainment business classes that I took were absolutely amazing. I had some great professors who are very experienced. One of them, I took a tour management class and a production management class, and the professor for both of those had worked with very high profile artists that are really, a household name, especially, 20, 30 years ago, but still to this day would be very well known. And that professor had also done some work with a major venue in New York City a while back, and basically rebuilt that venue's production from the ground up. So she had a lot of experience. It was really great to be able to basically pick her brain every day, and I always enjoyed that. And so I realized, well, you know what, maybe, tour management, that might kind of be better than doing just live sound. Like tour management sounds pretty cool. Oh, and we had a small student-run venue, so I got to be the production manager there, which is really a cool experience because it showed me how to advance a show, but it also let me see how awful, no offense to bands again, but how awful most bands are at advancing shows. And I learned, first of all, on my end, how to try to mitigate those problems, but also gave me a really great idea of what bands can do on their end to make sure those problems don't even come up if the production manager isn't great on the venue side, or if, the venue might not even have a production manager. It might just be like a talent buyer and a sound guy. Like there might not be that position at that venue. A lot of small clubs don't have a production manager per se.
Where did you go to school? I forget.
Oh, sorry. It was Bay State College
Bay
in
State.
Boston. And so our student-run venue was called The Spot. And they still do shows every Thursday throughout the semester, as far as I know. And under my reign, we had bands like the Venetia Fair come through, which
Nice.
was really fun.
For anybody who remembers that band.
Yeah.
Nuts.
R.I.P. And Sparks the Rescue. They just did an acoustic show when I was running things, but they had come through a few years earlier, full band, and I can't remember if I did lights or sound for them, but that was cool. Transit was one that we had come through there, and this was right before I got there, like the semester before I started. I can't even remember. I think it was State Champs came through. Like one of those bands that blew up in like 2012 had come through in the like start of 2011, winter, spring 2011. And then they blew up. So everyone's like, oh my God, this band was here. And it's like, yeah, that's awesome, And so it was really cool. There were some great opportunities, and, not every show was as fun as like having the Venetia Fair come through. But there were some other shows that were fun to do as well in their own rights. And we had some cool stuff too. The school provided a lot of great opportunities. They booked Kevin Lyman to come speak with students. And that was the year that I got to do Warped Tour for the first time. Not because I met Kevin Lyman, although he did give me some good advice, but I got to do Warped Tour with one of the sponsors in 2014 and then continue that into 2015 and the first part of Warped Tour 2016, which is when I officially retired from touring because I had realized my priorities had changed, which at the time I was 23. So that's probably not unusual for most 23-year-olds, but I realized, you know what? I don't want to live on the road for the next 40 years. That's not really what I'm cut out for. And, it is, for some people, that's great, and you can do it. For me, I just realized my heart wasn't in it anymore. And in the meantime, I'd also done some tours with other artists, ranging from DIY artists to bands or artists playing, let's say, 150, 200 cap rooms. So I got to see a little bit of how it works on a big tour and how it works on a small club tour and how it works on a DIY tour playing, basement shows. And aside from all of that, I've also always kind of been the go-to guy for people in my circle of friends who have questions about the music business or anything like that. And this is what inspired me in a way to create the Better Band Bureau, because so many people were always coming to me and asking questions. And I realized there's not really a great resource for this. There are other podcasts, there are other people out there doing stuff like this, but so much of it is just focused on money. The other music business podcasts, for the most part, focus on selling your music, promoting your music, branding, all that kind of stuff. And we're totally going to talk about that once in a while, but what we want to talk about mainly is running a DIY band and how you can make the most of touring as a DIY band. There's so much focus on marketing, and I don't believe that marketing is always the major issue bands have. A lot of people jump to the conclusion that, hey, we have to market ourselves, we have to put out ads, and there's totally a place for that. But at the same time, there are so many other things that a band should be focusing on aside from, how many Spotify plays you get. And that's all stuff that, Aaron, you track that, I'm sure, how many Spotify plays you get. But you also have a really solid foundation just for how to not be one of those guys in a band. You handle Suburban Samurai very well, whereas a lot of bands just are kind of cringy. That's what the Better Band Bureau is here for, is to help people understand that your band is a business and there's a lot more to it than just playing shows and expecting people to go listen to you on Spotify or throwing an ad up. There's so much to it that a lot of these other sources don't cover. So that's why we're here with the Better Band Bureau podcast.
And I do have to jump in and say that's something that's really attracted me to this project is that way of thinking about everything. And it's, it aligns pretty well with the way that I kind of look at it, which is marketing, one of the most important things you could do. Songwriting, one of the most important things you could do. Knowing how to, properly scale from one spot to another, one of the most important things. Like there are, however, like 95 different topics or each part of what this is, they're all one of the most important things you could do. And so it's that understanding that like marketing, like as you were saying, or tracking Spotify plays or this or that or the other thing, it's like they're all so important, or they could be, but they're also like you have 24 hours in a day, and you're like all of those things that should be the most important thing are also coexisting with all of the other things which should also be very important. And so I got to say that's one of the things that attracted me to this, to sort of thinking about you live in your central hub, and like each of those things are different avenues, or like an extension. They're all different pieces to what you're doing, but like you have to learn how to make them all play nice with one another while, not driving yourself insane. And like that's pretty easy. Like the driving yourself insane part's pretty easy to do if you don't keep yourself in check. So I just wanted to jump in and say, like, it's saying it out loud, like that sounds so obvious, but it's I don't know that a lot of people think of it in that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want to say it bugs me, because a lot of those podcasts that I mentioned are really great and they have a lot of great information. But I see 3 or 4 podcasts that all basically cover, marketing. It's like how to sell your music. And they do it in slightly different ways. Like one is more about licensing, one is more about just getting sales and streams. But, and this is even like CD Baby. They have the DIY Musician podcast. Great podcast. But a lot of it is about marketing and sales. And there's totally a place for that. But I don't see anyone else talking about this is how you build a DIY band from scratch. This is how you don't act like a fool when you're booking shows, And it just seems like everybody ignores this because it's not cool. It's like, oh, you got 1 million Spotify plays. That's so cool. Like, oh, you sold 1,000 copies. That's awesome. It's like, but there's so many things that don't really affect it directly, but do add to it, just like the food pyramid. And I know that's not a thing anymore, but if you're a kid of the 90s, you probably remember the food pyramid on the back of like a box of cereal or something. And think of marketing as like the top of the pyramid, whereas just being a good musician and knowing what you're doing and being respectful are like the base of it. At some point, I should probably make a graphic of that to kind of illustrate, the food pyramid of being in a band. But for right now, just remember that marketing is the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other things that you can do for your band that will help you build a long, sustainable career. That is what we're here to teach. To wrap that whole kind of rant up, what you define as success for your band can vary greatly, and it's ultimately going to come down to what fulfills you. But just a few different ways to look at it. You can look at bands like Rise Against, who headline amphitheater tours. They're successful financially. They're successful in that they have fame. They have thousands and thousands, or literally millions of people who know that band and love that band and know every word of every song. And that's one way to look at it. But those bands are like the 1%. If you go back almost 10 years and there's all this talk about the 1%, and there still is to an extent, but when I was first starting college, it was really like that was the thing, as people were talking about the 1%. Bands like Rise Against are the 1%. Same for any pop star like Lady Gaga or anything like that. They are the 1% of entertainers. Other bands, though, can have success in their own way. Like, I know a band who follows what they call the 1,000 true fan model, and that means that they have 1,000 fans who would literally give whatever they can to support that band. And this is a band who was on a record label and it didn't work out, and they essentially got dropped, but they got out of the deal, thankfully, and they did a Kickstarter. And they set a goal of $20,000, knowing that they needed at least $40,000 to do the album the way they wanted to. But they were willing to invest their own money to make up the difference. Well, within 24 hours, they got over $40,000, and at the end of the month, they had something along the lines of $120,000 or $130,000 for their project, which is a ton of money. And they did use it all for that album. They did a lot of bonus stuff, and it was really cool. But it just goes to show that even though this band, who's not commercially famous, can sustainably release music just because they have roughly 1,000 fans who are super dedicated. And 1,000 doesn't seem like a lot, and you might have 1,000 Facebook fans for your band already, but these are 1,000 fans who would literally give anything they could to help this band out.
They buy the new shirt when it comes out, like you said, the Kickstarter thing, or they buy the record, they show up at shows, they interact with you. Exactly.
And what I want to drive home here is this band plays venues that are typically like 200, 300 cap, but they made $140,000 on Kickstarter. And this was 5 years ago that they did this. Now they've switched over to Patreon and are doing everything through there because they can, every time they release a new album, keep those subscribers. They don't have to do a whole Kickstarter campaign again. They'll still do a campaign and all that, which I think is a really cool model that we might have to have an episode about in the future. And hopefully we could get one of those guys on the podcast to do an interview and talk about that model, because this is something they've been working on for a little over 10 years now. But there's also another model of success that I want to talk about, which is just if you have fun playing music on stage, whether you make money or not, playing shows might be what defines success for you. You know, if you can go and play a week of shows with your best friends and you're having the time of your life, that might be what success is for you. And there's no problem with that, but it will still make your life so much easier if you know the basics of being in a band. These are just 3 ways that I could see people defining success, and there are so many other ways that you might define it that there really is no one size fits all, but we're always welcome to having you ask questions and hear a little more about your personal situation. So just leave a comment on any of these episodes that we ever do, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'm sure Aaron will be poking around in the comments section as well whenever you can. But the main thing is we're here to help you start or continue growing your band to a level that defines success for you. We might not be artists who sell out giant arenas or amphitheaters or anything like that, but we've collectively spent 15, almost 20 years in the music business in various roles.
Boy.
It's a long time looking at it like that.
Yeah.
And have the knowledge of the industry in different capacities to help you build your band. That's why we're here.
So as we keep turning these out, James, correct me if I'm coming at it from the wrong place, but it seems like your success is something only you can define. And I think, to quote the great late Tony Stark, no amount of money ever bought a second of time. And so whether you're in it to enjoy yourself or whether you're in it, it's a career aspiration, or whether it's something else, do what you do seriously, and be honest about it. We'll cover that in other episodes, but it's important to communicate to others, how you're coming at something. But, work hard. It's smart to work smart, but I think most importantly, make sure that everything you do is honest work.
Yeah. Have integrity. That's really what it comes down to.
Exactly. Integrity.
And I think anyone will find that any successful artist, no matter how they define it, has integrity. Obviously, there are outliers. We all know the stories about artists who are just total jerks and trash the hotel room. But that is really not so common anymore.
If you really care about something and I think people will pick up on it, and that's a really nice thing.
Yeah, exactly. And fans can tell when you are being genuine or not. So I think really, especially in this day and age of accessibility where anyone is so accessible on social media, you have to be genuine, you have to have integrity, you have to be honest, and you have to truly care about what you're doing with your music, or fans won't care either. I think maybe that's where we should leave this episode and move on, because this episode was supposed to be about us, and I just went on a rant about how bands define success.
Foreshadowing.
Yes, foreshadowing for sure, and a little hint of what's to come right here on the Better Band Bureau podcast. So that is it for episode 2 of this podcast. Let us know what you think. If you're listening on iTunes, please go ahead and give us a 5-star review. You can reach out to us anytime at support@thebetterbandbureau.com, and I will be sure to get back to you. And also, one other favor, go over to Facebook and search for The Better Band Bureau, and we have a Facebook group there. Join us. Share your thoughts and opinions with other artists, because we can build a stronger community together by helping each other out. So just do us a favor, check that out, and then keep listening for the next episode where we talk about the things you should not do to become known as that band at the shows you play. So thanks again for listening from both myself and Aaron. Hope you have an awesome day, and check out the next episode, because all 3 of the first episodes come out today at the same time, so it's already ready for you to listen.